writing a musical about this kind of topic can really go either direction. I think it's in some ways just a bad idea, right? And so you need, as a writer, at least for me, you need evidence that this makes sense, that you're not, because especially for a show like this, the stakes are really high because this is real shit that happened to real people. Even though I went through it, you're now doing this. So the level of sensitivity, I think, really needs to be at the center.
Exploring life's journey, one story at a time. This is Trailheads with Jim Barrett.
In February of 2012, Matt Gittins survived a deadly high school shooting as a freshman within his small Ohio community. 14 years later, he has written a musical that explores the after effects of an event that's become all too familiar in the United States. Today, he returns to Trailheads to continue our conversation. Matt Gittins, thank you so much for joining me again. It's so great to see you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. We're back at it.
Well, much has happened since we spoke to each other last fall. I think it was September last time we spoke.
Has it really been that long?
Yeah.
It's crazy to me. Wow, it feels like we were just doing this.
Yeah. Well, update us and tell us what's going on with your musical, You Go On.
So we just had a reading series that happened in New York through a company. It was the Spotlight New Works, right? So it was with Gittins and Good Publishing and CPA Theatricals. Those were the two main drivers of the festival. But we had this reading series that went really well. So the other piece to this is we ended up having a off-Broadway run that's going to happen next year. So that'll be May 6th through June 6th at the Players Theater in Greenwich Village. So pretty exciting stuff.
Very exciting. Wow. So let's go back for those who maybe didn't see our first episode together, just to get viewers up to speed. So you and I both went through our own kind of major trauma when we were young, and myself losing my mom to suicide. And tell us what you endured when you were a high school freshman in school.
Yeah, for me and for my community, we all endured a school shooting that happened. For me, it was in 2012, February 27th. And so, so we had that school shooting. 3 individuals ended up passing on. We had a few others that were also injured during that, right? And then we had the entire community as well going through that together.
And so, Matt, tell us what you're doing now from the experience of surviving a school shooting.
I've been writing a musical for the last 10 years about a community that's been living through the aftermath of a school shooting. And it's a show that is really through the eyes of the students and as well as some of the adults, right? Some parents and some teachers. And it is an example of what can happen as a community tries to navigate this kind of traumatic event. One that is I think, very hard to navigate. Because you don't get a lot of closure, or at least in my experience, that's been
Right. Right.
So it can be a little bit just, you're left with a lot of questions.
Well, let me ask you this, Matt, because for me, 25 years after my mom's death by suicide, I chose to explore it artistically. I'm a filmmaker, TV producer, editor,
Yeah.
and I chose to create a film called Different Places, which is about 3 people, each affected by suicide in 3 different ways. So what's it been like for you to take that experience of the school shooting and turn it into a musical? Has it sparked questions with the cast and crew? Because for me, in making the film, it definitely did. There were some actors who had experience with suicide, some people behind the scenes. Did you have some experience similar to that as a producer of this work?
I have in many different facets. It's really, I don't know if interesting is the right word when you're talking about something like this, but I guess it'll be a placeholder word for me. Whenever, because there's been a variety of different people who have come into this show at this point. We've had multiple individuals play different roles, and the show seems to resonate in different ways for different people at different times. That's very general, but what I mean by that is, regardless of whether or not this is an experience that has happened to them or not, something seems to speak to them. And so we oftentimes have various conversations about what's going on in their own lives, how the themes in this show can relate to them. And so that's been a sort of interesting thing for me to see in sort of a macro sense, right? Of course, a school shooting is a very specific thing. And also, in a more general sort of macro sense, trauma is trauma is trauma. There are bonds that sort of hold us all together. And there are ways that we can empathize with one another, regardless of the situation, even though this is a very specific situation, something that, on a very grounded level is hard to imagine. And, I wouldn't want anybody to go through something like that. So I think that's one of the things. The content, right, is the focal point in everything that we talk about. That's what all the songs are about. That's what all the plot is driven towards talking about this event. And so because of that, conversations around school shootings in particular and trauma and all that, I mean, that's the focal point of everything that we discuss.
Has going through that process, working with the actors, putting it out before the world on a slightly larger scale, has that aided in your recovery, if you will, getting it out there?
Yeah. Yes, very much so.
We made it this far. So get your answers, cause in the line, everyone looking back is all the my head begin to come alive.
It's an interesting thing because, at least for me, there are two schools of thought for me that are sort of running parallel towards one another. This is a thing that happened to me, and so therefore you write from what you know. At the same time, you're trying to write a musical not just for yourself, right? You are writing not for other people, but you are very aware that other people will be coming and seeing it and, for lack of a better word, consuming it. And so you want to make sure that it is not just your therapy sessions on the stage. You want to craft a story. You want to make sure that your lyric writing is good, not just emotional, but is well thought out. You want to make sure that there's craft there. You want to take your art seriously. You want to take the voice that you're putting out there seriously, especially with a topic like this, because it's just such a sensitive thing. So, it's been fascinating to me to see what I've learned, how I've grown as a person, what kind of questions I had answered for myself. Yeah, and just how I've grown as an artist and as a person.
I gotta ask, have there been any triggers for you in the process? Anything you didn't expect? Then suddenly here you are in the reality of rehearsals or having conversations, having been.
Yeah, it both, right? I'll utilize, I suppose, the more literal definition of a trigger of something causing something else to happen. There are moments of real understanding and hope, and then moments of real sorrow and just gah. It's interesting. For me, it happens a lot more in the writing room than it does in rehearsal.
Interesting.
Um, in rehearsal, you really need to provide that safe space and that vulnerable space to talk about this. Because if you're not talking about it and you're not being vulnerable and doing that kind of thing, then you lose the heart of the show. You lose the reason for doing this in the first place. And at the same time, you also need to get the show blocked. You need to be able to talk about this, and you need to be able to do it in a way that's healthy. And so when I'm surrounded by my colleagues and friends and you know what I mean, and those kinds of things, I tend to be able to navigate that a little bit clearer. But when I'm here, when I'm writing a new lyric or thinking through a new thing and in some ways needing to go back to that space and go back to that mindset where I was when I was 15. um that's part of the reason that it's taken 10 years,
Oh, sure, sure.
because to rehash that kind of thing every day, for the at least every day for the better part of 6 years now, right? That takes a toll.
Have you, in the process again, in my experience with support groups that I co-led for people who had lost a loved one to suicide, somehow in the course of the 8-week support group, we found time to laugh, to actually have joy with these people. The only thing we have in common is this horrible thing, but
Yeah.
yet somehow We found time to celebrate life, to celebrate joy. How has that been for you to create that and to see other people experience it as it comes into reality?
Well, I think there's two sides to this. First one is that I cope a ton with using humor. I think when you're talking about this show, right, I really try to ground myself in in the heart of this show because of what we're talking about. But I think one thing that audiences are I think pleasantly surprised by is just how much humor and hope is in this show as well.
So I was in a school shooting earlier this year, and since then I've had this irrational fear of trying to steer any moving car. I'm also drinking more beer, and that's the thing that seems to keep my headspace clear.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts on how to move ahead without the need to take shots? Taking shots to get rid of all the shots in my head is a problem. Could you recommend some kale for me to eat instead? Are you okay?
Oh my God, Tyler.
The interesting thing for me is talking about it with individuals in my generation because it's hard to see the hope in sight when it comes to sort of these macro conversations of what are we going to do about this. And I think in many ways, part of the reason that I wrote this show is simply just because I was trying to sleep better.
What do people who have never experienced a mass shooting misunderstand about surviving one?
I'll say this, I don't know when it comes to mass shootings. I know school shootings. And I do think that there's an important distinction because one of the big things about school shootings is that you have to go back to the same place that this thing occurred at over and over and over again. I don't know if that's the case for mass shootings. So I do think that there's a slightly important distinction there. And so I'll talk about school shootings. When it comes to the survival aspect, right, there's not very much, especially for a student, right, that you can do, right? That's really up to the law enforcement. My community was very lucky. We had a very reactive law enforcement, and we had teachers who stepped up and are genuine heroes. When it comes to the aftermath, which is the thing that I can talk about, I think the lack of closure, the sense of why did this happen, not understanding why it happened, the real feeling of grief. I think those kinds of things are very hard to navigate. It's hard to put into words. And it's hard to get over because it all happened in an instant and you're not sure why and you're not sure what to do. And so I think that sort of limbo space that, at least for me, that I was in, and in many ways still am in, it makes it very hard to navigate and it makes it very hard to find solutions.
What has surviving something you have survived taught you about what's no longer important and what is?
What a great question. Well, I'll say this much. I don't sweat the small stuff anymore. I leaned into my family because I'm lucky enough to have a family that genuinely, really would do anything for me. How lucky am I? I've learned that taking it day by day is easier for me than taking it week by week or month by month. I have learned that life is short. And I have learned that there really are some pretty amazing people out there who come together when the worst of the worst decide to be the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
And how lucky am I to know some of them?
What does healing for you mean today than it did in the immediate aftermath?
Healing for me is looking past the anger. Actually, I don't even want to say looking past the anger. It's making room for the anger and other emotions as well. Should be angry, right? Kids are dying in safe spaces. I mean, what are we doing? And also for the individuals who are lucky enough to live and go on, the anger helps drive the action, and we need action. And also you play the hand that you're dealt, right? So for me, my mom having the foresight to see that I was in a very depressed state, and so getting me into theater, even though I didn't want to, even though I didn't have any interest in it, even though I didn't have any interest in doing theater in the first place in general, right? I didn't have any dreams of being a performer. I For me, healing is being aware of the fact that there can be multiple emotions at once and trying day in and day out to figure out how to carry this heavy load that you now have.
It's interesting you mentioned that about your mom, really both your parents. From what you said to me before is how amazingly empathetic of your parents to see that because you were a musician before. You were involved in the band, but you were not really at all involved in theater, right?
Well, I got to give my mom a lot of credit here. I give both my parents a ton of credit, but when it comes to the theater route, I give my mom a lot of credit because of the fact that my mom was in theater when she was in high school. So she had a positive experience with it at McKinley High School in Canton, because that's where she grew up. And so when we were younger, right, we went to a couple of musicals and things like that, right? We actually we lived in South Carolina, and when we were moving up to Ohio, because my dad got a job out here, um, when we were living in our sort of it's not an Airbnb, it was a motel, right? When we were living there, there was a golf course that was nearby. So my dad and I would walk the golf course and everything. And so while they were there, right, my dad and my brother would go and walk too and everything. And so my brother and my dad come home one day to the motel and they go, "We just met the guy who's playing the Phantom and Phantom of the Opera on like on the tour, right? There was a touring production that had happened and it just happened to meet him. And he really liked Drew, who's my brother. And so that evening they went to go see Phantom. My mom and my brother did, right? And he got a backstage tour and got a, you know what I mean, this whole thing. And so my brother, to this day, he has a photo of him wearing the skull mask, right? Or Phantom, right? I had a cat's birthday party when I was like 4, right? You know what I mean? So we had like musicals with us. But as we got older, that wasn't really our thing. We were much more of a sports family, and then I was into music and everything like that. But honestly, I was really into music. I really liked it. It was something that I was decent at. I wasn't particularly good at school. I wasn't a great math student. I wasn't a great science student. I wasn't really good at a lot of those things. And music I was good at. And so, you know what I mean? It works. For theater though, like I said earlier, we were talking about this, I was doing Godspell. That really happened because I was doing pit band for Chardon's production of Wizard of Oz that year. And so my mom, for whatever reason, was like, just try it, right? I was depressed. I wasn't going out. I wasn't doing anything like that. It was a local community theater production. She's like, just try it. So after a ton of convincing, right? Because I had no interest in it whatsoever. She convinced me to go for it. I had never sung in my life before. And she bribed me with getting some Yu-Gi-Oh cards, which Yu-Gi-Oh trading card games, right? Like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic the Gathering. Yu-Gi-Oh was a huge part of my life. And Yu-Gi-Oh, you go on. There's a whole trading card element that's in the
Wow.
show, and that's where
Wow. Okay. That's new. Okay, that's great
it's
to know
great to
about
know.
the cards.
So that's where that came from. So she bribed me with Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I went to the audition. I cried in the bathroom. I didn't want to go. All the auditions had already happened. So this was a private audition at the local community theater. And I got in. I think she really just took pity on me. And I'm a guy in theater, so it's just easier for me. And so I got a little solo in Light of the World. It was split up for 3 different people. And so I got a little fun solo for that. And then I just went, man. I caught the bug and I just went. And so from then on to really now, even, for the most part, I've done theater just the entirety of my existence.
That's awesome. That's such a great show to be your first one too. Were there moments when you guys were working it out, for Oh You Go On, where it was clicking. There's these moments in a good movie, these moments in a good musical when you really feel it. Tell me about some magic moments when you were getting this thing together.
Man, oh my gosh, how much time do you have? I mean, I'll tell you this much, that those magic moments there, for any writer who's listening, that's the thing that you continue to chase, right? That feeling of, oh, finally, right? This sort of this paint that I've splattered up against the canvas and I have no idea where it's going. It's making sense. Thank goodness I'm not crazy. And a lot of them are lyrics. The first one is the thesis statement of the show is a song called Get By. And there's a lyric in there that is, it is, we laugh, we hope, we cry, we cope, we wake up the next day. And for me, I was like, all right, that sums up my experience.
You plan, you pray, you don't know what to say to stay on the ground. You joke, you play, you keep the pain at bay, and you don't make a sound.
And that happened relatively early on. Because, at least for me, writing a musical about this kind of topic can really go either direction. I think it's in some ways just a bad idea, right? And so you need, as a writer, at least for me, you need evidence that this makes sense, that you're not, because especially for a show like this, the stakes are really high because this is real shit that happened to real people. And you are now, even though I went through it, you're now doing this, right? So the level of sensitivity, I think, really needs to be at the center. So to have that lyric sort of appear to me, I was like, okay, there's something here, at least for me. Then my main character, Tyler, there's a whole song called Teacher Song. It's all about Tyler, who's struggling with wanting to turn in his homework, and Mr. Holden, who is this teacher who is throughout the whole show, right? Many teachers struggled with how much workload do we give these students, right, during a time like this, right? You can't just sit in this feeling forever. So what is the appropriate time for us to move forward? And Mr. Holden is dealing with that, and so he's been giving his students a decent amount of homework, and part of it is to keep them busy and keep them preoccupied and those kinds of things. And Tyler really disagrees with that, and so they have this 6-minute song of back and forth and everything. And at the climax of the song, Tyler lands on, I don't care what this shit means. What if I don't make it to 16? I needed to take a lunch break after that. But that was a song that it was 6 minutes, and the whole song, I'd been sitting on the opening accompaniment for a year and a half. And then in one evening, 4 hours later, here was the whole song. And it was built around that idea. And then there was another one in the song called Thank You. Thank You is about an individual named Tiffany. She's new to the school. She's new to the community. She came in just, a few months before the shooting happens. So she gets to this new space, and then this traumatic event happens.
Months of seeing the snow turn to mud, always thinking too much. Watching the days turn to weeks, always wondering why I hold on to the moments I don't want to touch. Doors open and doors close, but doors never tell you where your life goes. It's not where I thought I would be.
And so these kinds of lyrics have sort of helped. Going back to your question of the healing process, it's through these lyrics that it sounds super strange, but in many ways just sort of appear to me looking at that and then recontextualizing my life and saying, wow, I've learned something about myself through writing this. These characters that aren't real, right? It's just me just writing things down, but they have now taught me something about myself. And that is something it makes this profession a very, very strange one. But it's like, yeah, this is another reason I've been writing it for 10 years, because these characters keep revealing things to me.
Well, this one I just have to ask, what's it like for you as someone who survived a shooting like that when you hear that another mass shooting has happened? I mean, we're at the point where mass shootings happen and it's like, wait, that happened 2 days ago? Where was that on the news? Where are you when you hear that another one has happened?
I mean, it's a very it's you you I think for me, I find myself I find it a little bit tricky to navigate because the shooting that happened in my community, at the time, it wasn't the same regular occurrence that it is now, and so I find myself, much like the main character, saying, "How are we moving on so quickly?" We sit in the emotion because to not sit in the emotion is to not talk about the thing, right? But I mean, we have a song called "The Grind," right, which is all about teenagers grinding on each other at prom, right? Because that's what the show is about as well. Is it's the
Yeah.
transitional period from school shooting to prom season. How do we move forward, right? And so that idea of moving forward, to not try to put hope into that equation, right? Um, I don't know if hope is the right word, but whether it's hope, love, um, I don't know if understanding is the right word either, but you go on, right? You find ways forward. You find that light. Um, I remember it's weird to say, it's morbid to say, but I even remember the day of the shooting. We were in lockdown and people were making jokes in my classroom because that's how you cope oftentimes. And so, for this show, it has been very important to have both sides of the theater mask, the crying mask and the laughing mask. And the audience deserves it, right? My God, they deserve a break. So did the students.
Yeah.
But if you're going to come and see this show and you're going to pay money and you're going to take the time to come out and sit with us and everything like that, you deserve some hope and you deserve some humor and you deserve those kinds of things too.
So have you been able to have, if you will, focus groups or small audiences who knew next to nothing about the show to come in and see and check it out?
Oh,
So
yeah.
how's that going?
Surprisingly well. Right? That was what a lot of this last reading series was, right? We had a lot of familiar faces in the audience for sure, because we're lucky enough to have a small but loyal fan base, right? Who like this show, who really do. I'm very, very, very thankful for them. But you have people who just come in and decide to join us, and it tends to be very positive. Of course, I've certainly gotten my own notes, right? And it's always very interesting because this show, this topic, evokes a lot of passion. And so people get very invested in this show. And I say thank goodness to that. I would much rather I'd much rather write a show that people care about than not.
Right.
And so that investment is always very welcome. Um, it's always interesting to watch individuals navigate their own emotions, right? Because I've had 10 years to navigate my own emotions with this show. And so it's always interesting and welcome to see people experience this for the first time and feel the passion that comes from them, the desire for change, the desire for growth, and the desire for a conversation.
So before we go into your lightning round, Matt, I got to ask, where can people keep up with your show, You Go On? Is there some place people can go to sort of check out the latest on it?
Absolutely. So there'll be its own website as well. But right now you can go to my website. It's www.matthewgittins, that's GITTINS.com. If you look at the bottom part of the website, you'll literally see a tab that says You Go On. You can't miss it, right? There you can listen to the entire soundtrack. You can see all of the updates that have happened for the show. You'll also be able to get like a script sample, right? The first 10 pages of the script or first 30 pages of the script. But there as well, for anybody anybody who's interested, because I'll plug my own shit. Why not, right? You'll also be able to find a donation page there too. One thing that's been very important about this show, especially to try to maintain its artistic integrity, is for us to be able to try to raise as much of that money as we can, so that we can get the people that we really, the people who get it, right, who know what we're trying to do here. And so for anybody who wants to support in that way, you certainly can as well. Tickets are technically live and everything for the off-Broadway run, but I'll be posting more about that on my social medias, which you can go to You Go On's social media page at you_go_on_musical for Instagram. So it's got its own page there, and you can certainly give us a follow. We follow
Awesome.
back.
And that'll be, of course, right here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, right in there.
so lightning round, you ready?
Yeah, let's do it, man.
There's the clock. Matt, what is the most powerful musical for you?
Sweeney Todd.
Awesome. Okay. Top artist in your playlist now.
Right now, either Nirvana, Kendrick Lamar, or Mayday Parade. Actually, it might be J. Cole because his most recent album is a classic.
Okay. Here's one. Famous person in history you would like to share You Go On with.
Dang. Famous person in history I'd like to share.
Just the response I was hoping for.
An individual named Bayard Rustin, who is a political activist for the civil rights movement. He said the medium defines the message. And I read that, and that is what I've aspired to do.
Last lightning round question. Best advice you've gotten from someone in the past year?
Perception is reality.
Can you go in a little bit deeper on that? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, what it means is that, I mean, it's that way for art, but there are things that you keep to yourself, and people only know what you decide to tell them. So people's perception of you is their reality of you. You can't care what everybody thinks. But
Good stuff.
But perception is reality.
That's
Can I add one more to that? Because my
Yes.
all-time favorite
Yes.
piece of advice that I've ever gotten. Shout out to Lenny Leibowitz for this one. He goes, Gittins, don't put other people's words in your mouth. It's unsanitary.
Nice. I'm going to leave that at that. That's good stuff. So before we say bye-bye for now, tell me what you got going on. I noticed you got a haircut, different from different from when we last spoke. What's that about?
I know. Yeah, it's all
Nice.
gone. I
Yes,
miss it.
yes.
But it's okay, right? We like this new hairstyle. Change happens. So I'm doing, I just finished up a production of Grease, where I was doing Vince Fontaine and I was doing Teen Angel. And now I'm doing a production of Brigadoon, where I'm playing Tommy, right? So needed short hair for that, right? And then I'll be going into a production of Falsettos, which also takes place in the 70s and 80s, and getting paid to act, right? How
Nice.
lucky am I?
Yes,
Right?
yes.
That's pretty, that's pretty cool.
Well, actually, there is one more thing I forgot to add in here, which I kind of need to. Not too much pressure,
Sure.
but this is a show called Trailheads. I have experience on the trail. Getting
I was
out to
hoping we would
nature
talk
for
about
good
this.
mental health. Tell me about how you connect.
My gosh. We could talk about this. Shout out to Trailheads, right? We could talk about them for a long time. How do I connect with nature? Nature, I mean, if you were to ever have my parents on, they would tell you, right? Especially when I was younger, man, I would go out because we lived out in the woods, and and I would just go out there for hours. Nature is the thing that really centers me. It's what gets me back to my roots. It's the thing that got me through the shooting, right, as well. My safe space was outside, and I never wanted to go in and do my homework. I always wanted to be outside and do those kinds of things, and I would have my trading cards outside attached to this thing that would hold them all, and then I would play the shit, and I was in, man. And so I would do that for as long as I could. Whenever I would snowboard, right? I was the dude who's first one on the slopes, and I would not leave until I literally could not feel my fingers anymore. We just a fun side tangent real quick. I went on my first vacation in like 8 years or something like that. And it was my first time out of the country, and I went to Croatia. shout outs to my brother and my sister-in-law, Maggie. They really wanted to do a siblings trip. And so we all went out there. One thing that they really wanted to include was they have this waterfall park, right? And it is just this massive, humongous place of just waterfalls on waterfalls on waterfalls. And you can walk this whole thing. And that's what we did. We went up to the top of this mountain and then walked for, several hours and everything like that. I mean, that was the coolest experience that I've ever seen, right? I mean, it was insane. So to make a long story long, nature is my muse in many ways.
Matt Gittins, thank you so much for joining me again, and I'm so happy that You Go On is going on to be off Broadway next summer. I can't wait to see that. Can't wait to experience it with you in person.
Can't wait to see you there. Yes. It's always so great to be here. You're the bomb, my man. So thank you very much for having me, and let's do this again.
All right, Matt. Thank you very much. Have a great week.
You have a good one, okay?